Lucas Harrow, a racist cop, arrests black FBI agent's daughter, Lily, over a suspicious theft accusation. But just 3 minutes later, Lily's father, Mason, strikes back, turning the officer's world upside down with a brutal revenge. What hidden dangers lie beneath the surface, and how far will a father go to protect his child? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The sun shone brightly on the busy city streets as Lily Bennett made her way through the crowd. Her heart was light, and a big smile played on her lips. Today was special. She was on a mission to find the perfect birthday gift for her mom. Lily's eyes sparkled with excitement as she spotted the fancy jewelry store up ahead. The glittering window display made her pause for a moment. She took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy glass door. A little bell jingled as she stepped inside. The store was quiet and cool, a stark contrast to the noisy street outside. Lily's eyes widened as she took in all the sparkling treasures around her. "Can I help you, miss?" a kind voice asked. Lily turned to see a smiling lady behind the counter. "Oh, yes, please," she said. "I'm looking for a birthday gift for my mom." The lady's smile grew warmer. "That's so thoughtful of you. Do you have something in mind?" Lily bit her lip, thinking hard. "Well, my mom loves necklaces and her favorite color is blue." "I think I have just the thing," the lady said, leading Lily to a display case. As Lily looked at the beautiful necklaces, she thought about her dad, Mason. He had always taught her the importance of showing love through actions, not just words. This gift was her way of doing just that. Mason Bennett wasn't just her dad, he was her hero. As an FBI agent, he spent his days fighting for justice, but to Lily, he was the one who made her pancakes on Sunday mornings and helped her with her math homework. "Your mom is lucky to have such a caring daughter," the lady said, interrupting Lily's thoughts. Lily felt her cheeks grow warm. "Thanks," she said softly. "My dad always says it's important to show people how much we care." The lady nodded. "Your dad sounds like a wise man." "He is," Lily agreed, her chest swelling with pride. As Lily continued to browse, she thought about all the times her dad had encouraged her to be kind and thoughtful. Like the time she wanted to skip her friend's birthday party because she was too tired. Mason had gently reminded her how she'd feel if her friends didn't come to her party, or when she was nervous about giving a speech in class, and he helped her practice for hours. He always said, "Lily, the most important thing is to speak from your heart." Now, standing in this fancy store, Lily felt grateful for all those lessons. She wasn't just buying a necklace, she was showing her mom how much she cared, just like her dad had taught her. Lily's eyes danced from one sparkling display to another, her heart fluttering with excitement. Each necklace seemed more beautiful than the last, and she found herself lost in a world of glittering gems and shining metals. As she moved closer to a display of delicate pendants, Lily felt a sudden chill run down her spine. She glanced up only to find a well-dressed woman staring at her with an intensity that made her stomach twist. The woman, who Lily would later learn was Mrs. Hawthorne, wore an expensive-looking suit and a frown that seemed etched into her face. Her eyes never left Lily as she leaned over to whisper something to a nearby store employee. Lily's cheeks grew warm as she noticed the employee's suspicious glance in her direction. She tried to focus on the necklaces in front of her, but her hands trembled slightly as she reached out to touch a pretty silver chain. "Is everything okay?" Lily wanted to ask, but the words stuck in her throat. She'd never felt so out of place before. The joy she'd felt earlier began to fade, replaced by an annoying anxiety that made her want to run from the store. But Lily thought of her mom and the perfect gift she was determined to find. She took a deep breath, just like her dad had taught her when she felt nervous. "I belong here just as much as anyone else," she reminded herself silently. Still, She couldn't shake the feeling of Mrs. Hawthorne's eyes boring into her back. Every time Lily moved to a different display, she could hear whispers and feel stares following her. The beautiful jewelry store now felt more like a cage, with Lily trapped inside. She tried to focus on choosing a necklace, but her mind kept wandering back to Mrs. Hawthorne and the employee. Why were they watching her so closely? Had she done something wrong without realizing it? Lily's hands shook as she picked up a delicate blue pendant. It was beautiful, exactly the kind of thing her mom would love. But as she held it, she noticed Mrs. Hawthorne nudge the employee and nod in her direction. The uneasy feeling in Lily's stomach grew stronger. She wanted nothing more than to leave the store, to escape the judging eyes and whispered words. But she also wanted to prove to herself and to them that she had every right to be there. With a mix of determination and fear, Lily continued to browse, all too aware of the tension building around her. She tried to ignore the stares, focusing instead on finding the perfect gift for her mom. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. As Lily stepped out of the jewelry store, her heart heavy with disappointment, she took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. She hadn't found the perfect gift for her mom, but she was relieved to be free from the uncomfortable atmosphere inside. Her moment of relief was short-lived. A stern voice called out, "Excuse me, miss. Stop right there." Lily turned to see a police officer striding toward her, his face set in a hard frown. Her stomach dropped as he approached, his badge glinting in the sunlight. "I'm Officer Lucas Harrow," he said, his voice gruff and authoritative. "We've had a report of a missing necklace from the display case. I need you to empty your pockets." Lily's eyes widened in shock. "What? But I didn't take anything." Her voice trembled as she spoke, her hands shaking at her sides. Officer Lucas's eyes narrowed. "That's what they all say. Now empty your pockets, or I'll have to search you myself." Tears welled up in Lily's eyes as she fumbled with her jacket pockets. "Please, there's been a mistake. I was just looking. I swear I didn't take anything." As Lily turned out her empty pockets, a small crowd began to gather on the sidewalk. Whispers and pointed fingers made Lily's cheeks burn with embarrassment. "She looks guilty," one onlooker muttered. "Poor girl, she seemed so scared," another whispered. Officer Lucas's voice grew louder and more aggressive. "Where did you hide it? In your bag, your shoes?" Lily's voice cracked as she pleaded, "I didn't take anything, please. You have to believe me." The crowd grew larger, their whispers becoming a dull roar in Lily's ears. She felt trapped, surrounded by accusing eyes and judgmental stares. Her hands trembled as she clutched her bag close to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "I want to call my dad," Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Officer Lucas scoffed. "You can call your dad from the station. Now hand over your bag." Lily's world seemed to spin around her. She couldn't believe this was happening. Just minutes ago, she had been excited about finding a gift for her mom. Now, she was being accused of theft in front of a growing crowd of strangers. As Officer Lucas reached for her bag, Lily took a step back, her eyes darting around frantically, searching for a friendly face in the sea of onlookers. But all she saw were curious stares and disapproving frowns. As the tension escalated, a commanding voice cut through the crowd. "What's going on here?" The sea of onlookers parted, revealing a tall, imposing man with a determined stride. It was Mason Bennett, Lily's father, his face etched with concern and anger. Lily's eyes lit up with relief. "Dad!" she cried, her voice cracking with emotion. Mason quickly made his way to his daughter's side, placing a protective arm around her trembling shoulders. He turned to face Officer Lucas, his eyes blazing with intensity. "I'm Mason Bennett, FBI," he said, his voice calm but authoritative as he flashed his badge. "What's the meaning of this?" Officer Lucas's demeanor shifted slightly, but he stood his ground. "This young woman is suspected of shoplifting a valuable necklace from the jewelry store," he stated firmly. Mason's eyebrows furrowed. "And what evidence do you have to support this accusation?" Lucas hesitated for a moment. "We received a report." "A report is not evidence," Mason interrupted, his voice sharp. "Have you checked the security cameras? Searched my daughter? Found any stolen property?" The crowd watched in hushed silence as the confrontation unfolded. Lily clung to her father's side, drawing strength from his presence. Lucas's face reddened. "I was in the process of conducting a search when you arrived," he said defensively. Mason's eyes narrowed. "Without probable cause or a warrant?" "I don't think so." He turned to Lily, his voice softening. "Sweetheart, did you take anything from the store?" Lily shook her head vigorously. "No, Dad, I swear I didn't." Mason nodded, then faced Lucas again. "My daughter says she's innocent, and you have no evidence to the contrary. I demand that you release her immediately." The tension in the air was palpable as Lucas and Mason stared each other down. Suddenly, Lucas's radio crackled to life. "Officer Harrow," a stern voice came through. "Report back to the precinct immediately." Lucas's face fell, realizing the situation had escalated beyond his control. He cleared his throat, trying to maintain his composure. "This isn't over," he muttered before turning on his heel and striding away. As Lucas retreated, the crowd began to disperse, their whispers fading into the background. Mason hugged Lily tightly, feeling her body shake with silent sobs. "It's okay, sweetheart," he murmured, stroking her hair. "You're safe now. Let's go home." As the tension began to dissipate, Lucas Harrow's face softened unexpectedly. He took a deep breath and turned to face Lily and Mason. "I owe you both an apology," Lucas said, his voice low and hesitant. "I may have overreacted in this situation." Lily and Mason exchanged surprised glances. The crowd that remained watched in stunned silence. Lucas continued, his eyes meeting Lily's. "Miss Bennett, I'm sorry for putting you through this ordeal. It was unprofessional of me to make accusations without proper evidence." He then turned to Mason. "Agent Bennett, I apologize for my conduct. I should have handled this situation more carefully." Mason studied Lucas's face, trying to gauge the sincerity of his words. While the apology seemed genuine, a nagging doubt lingered in his mind. He nodded curtly, acknowledging Lucas's words, but not quite ready to forgive. "Thank you for the apology, Officer Harrow," Mason said, his tone measured. "I hope this serves as a learning experience." As Lucas walked away, his shoulders slumped with the weight of his actions. Lily tugged gently on her father's sleeve. "Dad," she whispered, her voice still shaky, "there's something else you should know." Mason looked down at his daughter, concern etched on his face. "What is it, sweetheart?" Lily took a deep breath. "Inside the store, there was this woman, Mrs. Hawthorne. She kept watching me like she was suspicious of something. It made me really uncomfortable." Mason's brow furrowed as he processed this new information. "Mrs. Hawthorne? Did you know her?" Lily shook her head. "No, I've never seen her before, but she was whispering to one of the employees and pointing at me." A troubled look crossed Mason's face. He gently squeezed Lily's shoulder. "That's important information, Lily. Thank you for telling me." As they stood there, the bustle of the city continuing around them, Mason couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this incident than met the eye. The pieces didn't quite fit together. Lucas's aggressive behavior, his sudden apology, and now this mysterious Mrs. Hawthorne. Something wasn't right, and Mason was determined to get to the bottom of it. Mason gently guided Lily to his car, his protective arm around her shoulders. As they drove home, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in his stomach. Something about this whole situation just didn't add up. "You okay, sweetheart?" he asked, glancing at Lily. She nodded, but her eyes were distant. "I just can't believe that happened. It was so scary, Dad." Mason's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "I know, honey. I'm sorry you had to go through that, but we'll figure this out, I promise." As they pulled into their driveway, Mason's mind was racing. He kept replaying the scene in his head, focusing on the brief exchange he'd witnessed between Mrs. Hawthorne and the store employee just before Lily was confronted. Once inside, Mason made sure Lily was comfortable and had everything she needed. "Why don't you rest for a bit? I need to make a few calls." Lily nodded, curling up on the couch with a blanket. Mason kissed her forehead before heading to his home office. He sat at his desk, determination etched on his face. This wasn't just about clearing Lily's name anymore. His instincts told him there was something deeper going on, and he was going to get to the bottom of it. Mason picked up his phone and dialed the jewelry store's number. After a brief conversation with the receptionist, he was connected to the manager. "Hello, this is FBI agent Mason Bennett," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "I'd like to discuss the incident that occurred at your store earlier today involving my daughter." The manager sounded nervous. "Oh yes, that was unfortunate. How can I help you, Agent Bennett?" "I'd like to come in and review any security footage you have from today," Mason replied. "I believe there may be more to this situation than what appeared on the surface." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Of course, Agent Bennett. When would you like to come in?" "I'll be there in an hour," Mason said firmly. After hanging up, Mason checked on Lily once more before grabbing his keys. He had a determined look in his eyes as he headed out the door. Whatever was going on, he was going to uncover the truth and make sure justice was served. Mason arrived at the jewelry store, his determined stride carrying him through the glass doors. The manager, a balding man in his 50s, greeted him with a nervous smile. "Agent Bennett, thank you for coming," the manager said, wringing his hands. "I'm Mr. Spencer. How can I assist you today?" Mason's keen eyes scanned the store, taking in every detail. "I'd like to review the security footage from the time my daughter was here." Mr. Spencer's smile faltered. "Yes, about that. We've been having some technical issues with our security system." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? What kind of issue?" "Well, you see," Mr. Spencer stammered, "there seems to be a gap in the footage during the time your daughter was in the store." Mason's suspicion grew, a knot forming in his stomach. "That's quite a coincidence, don't you think?" Mr. Spencer nodded nervously. "Yes, it is unfortunate timing. We've called our tech support, but they haven't been able to recover the missing footage yet." Mason crossed his arms, his gaze steady. "I'd still like to see what you do have. Perhaps we can piece together what happened." "I'm not sure that would be helpful," Mr. Spencer said, his eyes darting around the store. "Without the crucial footage, it might just cause more confusion." Mason leaned in slightly, his voice low but firm. "Mr. Spencer, I'm here as part of an official investigation. I'd appreciate your full cooperation in this matter." The manager swallowed hard. "Of course, Agent Bennett. It's just our policy. We need to protect our customers' privacy." Mason's patience was wearing thin. "I understand privacy concerns, but this is about clearing my daughter's name. Surely you can see how important this is?" Mr. Spencer nodded reluctantly. "I'll see what I can do, but I can't promise anything." As the manager fumbled with excuses, Mason made mental notes. Something wasn't right here, and he was determined to get to the bottom of it. He'd need to look into the store's history, check for any previous incidents or complaints. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Spencer," Mason said, his tone measured. "I'll be in touch, and I expect full cooperation moving forward." As Mason left the store, his mind was already racing with next steps. This was far from over, and he wouldn't rest until he uncovered the truth. Mason left the jewelry store, his mind whirling with questions. Something wasn't right, and he could feel it in his bones. As he drove back to his office, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to this story than met the eye. Back at his desk, Mason dove into research. He pulled up records of recent incidents at the jewelry store. his eyes scanning the reports with growing concern. A pattern began to emerge, and it made his heart sink. Over the past 6 months, there had been 5 separate incidents involving black teenagers being accused of theft at the same store. In each case, the teens had been detained and questioned, only to be released later when no evidence was found. Mason leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. This couldn't be a coincidence. As he dug deeper, another detail caught his eye. In 4 out of the 5 cases, Mrs. Hawthorne had been present or involved in reporting the supposed suspicious behavior. "This can't be happening," Mason muttered to himself, his voice heavy with disbelief and anger. He pulled up Mrs. Hawthorne's file, his eyes narrowing as he read through her background. She was the wife of a local judge, decent, well-connected and influential in the community. But as Mason delved deeper, he found whispers of past complaints against her, all carefully buried or dismissed. Mason's concern deepened with each new piece of information. This wasn't just about Lily anymore. It was becoming clear that there was a larger issue at play, one that involved racial profiling and potential abuse of power. He picked up a framed photo of Lily from his desk, her bright smile beaming back at him. "I'm going to fix this, sweetheart," he promised softly, "for you and for all the other kids who've been wrongly accused." Mason set the photo down and stood up, determination etched on his face. He knew the road ahead would be challenging. Taking on someone like Mrs. Hawthorne with her connections and influence wouldn't be easy. But he had never been one to back down from a fight, especially when it came to protecting the innocent. "Time to get to work," he said to himself, grabbing his jacket. He had leads to follow, witnesses to interview, and a truth to uncover. Mason Bennett was on a mission. And he wouldn't rest until he got to the bottom of this troubling pattern of injustice. Mason delved deeper into Mrs. Hawthorne's background, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he searched through databases and public records. His eyes widened as he uncovered a crucial piece of information. Mrs. Hawthorne was the wife of Judge Samuel Hawthorne, a local judge with a controversial history. "Well," Mason muttered, leaning back in his chair, "what do we have here?" He pulled up Judge Hawthorne's case history, focusing on rulings involving racial discrimination. As he scrolled through the records, a troubling pattern emerged. In case after case, Judge Hawthorne had ruled against plaintiffs claiming racial discrimination, often dismissing their complaints on technicalities. Mason's jaw clenched. This wasn't just about Mrs. Hawthorne anymore. It was becoming clear that her actions might be part of a larger systemic issue. Determined to gather more evidence, Mason set out to interview witnesses from previous incidents at the jewelry store. He started with Claire, a college student who had been working at the coffee shop across the street. "I remember seeing that woman there a lot," Claire said, her brow furrowed. "She always seemed to be watching the younger customers, especially if they were black. It made me uncomfortable." Mason nodded, jotting down notes. "Did you ever see her interact with the store staff?" Claire's eyes lit up with recognition. "Actually, yes. She was always whispering to them, pointing out customers. It seemed off." As Mason interviewed more witnesses, a clear pattern began to emerge. Mrs. Hawthorne had been present during multiple incidents, always singling out young black customers as suspicious. One witness, an elderly man named Mr. Johnson, shook his head sadly as he recounted what he'd seen. "It's a shame, really. Those kids were just trying to shop, same as anyone else," Mr. Johnson said. "But that woman, she'd watch them like a hawk, then go running to the staff. Next thing you know, security's involved." Mason's notebook filled up with similar accounts. Each story added another piece to the puzzle, painting a disturbing picture of racial profiling and discrimination. Back at his office, Mason spread out his notes, connecting the dots between Mrs. Hawthorne's complaints and the subsequent incidents. He created a timeline, marking each event and noting the similarities. This can't be a coincidence, he said to himself, staring at the evidence before him. The pattern was clear. Mrs. Hawthorne had consistently targeted young black customers, filing complaints that led to their detainment and questioning. Mason sat back, running a hand through his hair. He knew he was onto something big, something that went beyond just one incident with his daughter. This was about a systemic issue of racial profiling, one that had been going on for far too long. Mason's investigation took an unexpected turn when he stumbled upon a crucial piece of information. As he delved deeper into Lucas Harrow's background, he discovered a surprising connection that made his heart race. "Well, I'll be damned," Mason muttered, staring at his computer screen. It turned out that Lucas's brother, James Harrow, was a high-profile defense attorney. What caught Mason's attention wasn't just James's impressive client list, but one particular name that stood out: Hawthorne. Mason leaned in closer, his eyes scanning the document. James Harrow had represented Mrs. Hawthorne and her husband, Judge Samuel Hawthorne, in various legal matters over the years. The connection was undeniable. This can't be a coincidence, Mason said to himself, his mind racing with possibilities. He sat back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. The pieces were starting to fall into place, forming a picture that was far more complex than he had initially imagined. It wasn't just about racial bias anymore. There was something deeper, more sinister at play. Mason picked up his phone and dialed his partner, Agent Elena Morales. "Elena, I need you to dig into Lucas Harrow's financials," he said as soon as she answered. "Look for any unusual transactions or connections to the Hawthorne family." "On it," Elena replied. "What are you thinking, Mason?" Mason sighed heavily. "I'm thinking this whole incident with Lily might be part of a larger scheme. Lucas's brother has represented the Hawthorne family. It's possible Lucas was influenced to target Lily specifically." "That's a serious accusation," Elena warned. "We need solid evidence." "I know," Mason agreed. "That's why we need to be thorough. This could go beyond just one incident of racial profiling. We might be looking at a pattern of corruption involving the police, the courts, and who knows what else." As Mason hung up the phone, he felt a mix of determination and unease. The case had taken a turn he hadn't expected, and the implications were far-reaching. If his suspicions were correct, it meant that the incident wasn't just a random act of bias, but a calculated move in a much larger game. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began mapping out the connections. Mrs. Hawthorne, Judge Hawthorne, Lucas Harrow, and James Harrow, all linked in a web of potential corruption. And at the center of it all, his daughter Lily, unwittingly caught in their crosshairs. Mason's jaw clenched as he stared at the diagram. He knew he was stepping into dangerous territory. These were powerful people with a lot to lose if their schemes were exposed. But he couldn't back down now, not when his daughter's safety and the integrity of the justice system were at stake. Mason sat at his desk, poring over the latest report he'd received. His eyes widened as he read the details, and he let out a low whistle. The missing necklace, the very one Lily had been accused of stealing, had actually been reported stolen weeks before the incident. "This doesn't add up," Mason muttered, shaking his head. He grabbed his jacket and headed out, determined to get answers. The drive to the jewelry store felt longer than usual, his mind racing with questions and theories. As Mason pushed open the store's glass door, the soft chime of bells announced his arrival. The manager, Mr. Spencer, looked up from behind the counter, his smile faltering as he recognized Mason. "Agent Bennett," Mr. Spencer said, his voice tight. "What can I do for you today?" Mason approached the counter, his eyes locked on the manager. "I need to talk to you about the missing necklace, Mr. Spencer, the one my daughter was accused of stealing." Mr. Spencer's smile disappeared completely. "I thought we had cleared that up, Agent Bennett. It was a misunderstanding." Mason pulled out a copy of the report. According to this, that necklace was reported stolen 3 weeks before the incident with my daughter. Care to explain? The colour drained from Mr. Spencer's face. He fumbled with his glasses, avoiding Mason's gaze. There must be some mistake, he stammered. I don't think so, Mason pressed. This report is quite clear. So why was my daughter accused of stealing a necklace that had already been reported missing? Mr. Spencer took a deep breath, seeming to gather himself. It was a simple error, Agent Bennett. The necklace was thought to have been returned. We must have forgotten to update the report. Mason raised an eyebrow. Forgotten? That's a pretty big thing to forget, Mr. Spencer, especially when it led to an innocent teenager being accused of theft. The manager's explanation felt hollow, raising more questions than it answered. Mason could feel his suspicion growing with each passing moment. There was more to this story, and he was determined to uncover it. I'd like to see your inventory records, Mason said, his tone leaving no room for argument, and any security footage from the day that necklace was supposedly returned. Mr. Spencer's eyes darted nervously around the store. I'm not sure I can provide that without consulting our legal team, he stammered. Mason leaned in closer, his voice low but firm. Mr. Spencer, I hope you understand the seriousness of this situation. If there's something you're not telling me, now would be the time to come clean. The manager's silence spoke volumes. Mason could almost see the gears turning in the man's head, weighing his options. Whatever was going on here, it was clear that the jewelry store was involved in something far more complex than a simple misunderstanding. Mason left the jewelry store, his mind buzzing with unanswered questions. He knew he needed more information, and his next lead was closer to home. With a deep breath, he dialed a number he rarely used. Officer Grant, it's Agent Bennett. I need to talk to you about Lucas Harrow. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mason, you know I can't discuss internal matters, Officer Grant replied, his voice hesitant. I'm not asking for anything official, Mason assured him. Just a conversation between old friends. Can we meet? An hour later, Mason sat across from Officer Grant in a quiet corner of a local diner. The older man looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting around as if expecting to be overheard. What's this about, Mason? Grant asked, his voice low. Mason leaned forward. I need to understand Lucas's behavior, his connection to Mrs. Hawthorne. There's something not right about the incident with my daughter. Grant sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. Look, Lucas is complicated. He and his brother, they're close, real close. Mason's eyebrows raised. His brother? The defense attorney? Grant nodded. Yeah, well, they look out for each other. If one's in a tight spot, the other's always there to help out. Help out how? Mason pressed. Grant shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. I shouldn't say more, but let's just say if Lucas ever finds himself in hot water, his brother's always there to cool things down and vice versa. Mason felt a chill run down his spine. And Mrs. Hawthorne? How does she fit into all this? Grant's eyes widened slightly. Mrs. Hawthorne? Aye. I don't know anything about that. But Mason could see the flicker of recognition in the officer's eyes. There was a connection there, something Grant wasn't saying. Thank you for your time, Officer Grant, Mason said, standing up. You've been very helpful. As he walked out of the diner, Mason's mind was racing. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Lucas and his brother covering for each other, Mrs. Hawthorne with her connections to the local judge, and now a falsely reported stolen necklace. There was more to this than just racial bias. Mason was now certain that Lucas had been influenced, maybe even coerced, into targeting Lily. But why? What was the bigger picture he was missing? Mason got into his car, his determination stronger than ever. He would uncover the truth, no matter where it led him, for Lily and for justice. Mason sat at his desk, poring over the files he had gathered. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was more complex than he had initially thought. He rubbed his tired eyes, trying to make sense of the information in front of him. As he flipped through the pages, a pattern began to emerge. Mason's eyes widened as he realized the implications. Mrs. Hawthorne's name appeared repeatedly in connection with jewelry insurance claims. Each claim coincided with reports of stolen jewelry from the same store where Lily had been accused. "This can't be a coincidence," Mason muttered to himself, his heart racing. He picked up his phone and dialed a trusted contact at the insurance company. After a brief conversation, his suspicions were confirmed. Mrs. Hawthorne had filed multiple claims over the past year, each for substantial amounts. Mason leaned back in his chair, the weight of this new information settling on his shoulders. It wasn't just about racial profiling anymore. This was a carefully orchestrated fraud scheme, and Lily had unwittingly become a pawn in Mrs. Hawthorne's game. She needed a scapegoat, Mason said aloud, the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. And Lily was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He thought about his daughter, how shaken she had been after the incident. The injustice of it all made his blood boil. Mrs. Hawthorne hadn't just wronged Lily, she had manipulated the system, using racial bias as a smokescreen for her criminal activities. Mason stood up, determination filling him. He needed to act fast. This new information changed everything. It wasn't just about clearing Lily's name anymore. It was about exposing a larger conspiracy that had likely affected many innocent people. He picked up his phone again, this time calling his supervisor. "Sir, I need to brief you on a development in the case involving my daughter. It's bigger than we thought." As Mason explained the situation, he could hear the surprise in his supervisor's voice. "This is serious, Bennett. We'll need to involve the fraud division. How solid is your evidence?" "Solid enough to warrant a full investigation," Mason replied confidently. "But we need to move quickly. If Mrs. Hawthorne realizes we're onto her, she might try to cover her tracks." After hanging up, Mason took a deep breath. The case had taken an unexpected turn, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for Lily now, he was fighting for justice on a much larger scale. As Mason delved deeper into the case, the situation took an unexpected turn. Lucas's brother, a prominent defense attorney named James Harrow, held a press conference to publicly defend Mrs. Hawthorne. Standing before a sea of cameras and microphones, James's voice boomed with conviction. "It has come to my attention that FBI agent Mason Bennett is using his position to intimidate and harass Mrs. Hawthorne, a respected member of our community," James declared, his words sharp and accusatory. "This is a clear abuse of power driven by a father's misguided vendetta." The media latched onto James's claims, spinning the story in a new direction. Headlines blared across TV screens and newspapers. FBI agent accused of misusing power in personal vendetta. Overnight, Mason found himself cast as the villain in a narrative he couldn't control. As Mason sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through the news on his tablet, he felt a knot forming in his stomach. The pressure was mounting, and he could feel the weight of public scrutiny bearing down on him. He looked up to see Lily enter the room, her eyes red and puffy from lack of sleep. "Dad," Lily said softly, her voice trembling, "people at school are talking about us. They're saying awful things." Mason's heart ached for his daughter. He stood up and wrapped her in a tight hug. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. This isn't fair to you." Lily buried her face in her father's chest. "Why won't they leave us alone? I just want things to go back to normal." As Mason held his daughter, he felt a mix of anger and determination. He knew he was on the right track with the investigation, but the constant media attention was taking its toll on both of them. Later that day, Mason received a call from his supervisor. "Bennett, we need to talk about the media coverage. It's not looking good." Mason sighed heavily. "I know, sir, but I'm close to cracking this case wide open. We can't back down now." "I understand," his supervisor replied, "but tread carefully. Your reputation is on the line here." As Mason hung up the phone, he felt the pressure intensifying. He knew he was right about Mrs. Hawthorne and the insurance fraud scheme, but proving it while under such intense scrutiny would be challenging. That evening, as Mason worked late into the night, he heard a soft knock on his office door. Lily peeked in, her face etched with worry. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mason managed a small smile. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just working on clearing our names." Lily stepped into the room, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I want to help. This isn't just about me anymore, is it? It's about all the people Mrs. Hawthorne has hurt." Mason felt a surge of pride for his daughter's strength. Despite the pressure and attention, she was thinking of others. He nodded, realizing that they were in this fight together. The next morning, as Mason sat at his desk sifting through mountains of paperwork, his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Hesitantly, he answered. "Agent Bennett?" a nervous voice whispered. "I have some information about what happened at the jewelry store." Mason's heart raced. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. "I can't say my name," the caller replied. "I work at the store. I saw something that day, something important." Mason grabbed a pen and paper. "I'm listening. Please tell me everything you saw." The employee's words tumbled out in a rush. "Mrs. Hawthorne was there that day. I saw her whispering to the store manager just before your daughter was detained. It looked suspicious." Mason's pen flew across the paper, jotting down every detail. "What else?" he prompted. "There's more," the caller continued. "I saw Mrs. Hawthorne handling a piece of jewelry. It was the same necklace that went missing. She was acting strange, looking around nervously. Then she just left in a hurry." Mason's mind raced with the implications. "Are you saying she might have taken the necklace herself?" "I can't be sure," the employee hesitated, "but it all happened right before your daughter was accused. It doesn't feel right." As the call ended, Mason sat back in his chair, his heart pounding. This was the break he'd been waiting for. The anonymous tip suggested that Mrs. Hawthorne might have staged the theft to frame Lily. It was a crucial piece of the puzzle, but Mason knew he needed more substantial evidence to build a solid case. He picked up his phone again, dialing a trusted colleague at the FBI. "Jack, I need a favor," Mason said. "Can you discreetly pull the security camera footage from the streets around that jewelry store? I need to track Mrs. Hawthorne's movements that day." As he hung up, Mason felt a glimmer of hope. He was one step closer to uncovering the truth and clearing Lily's name. But he knew the road ahead would be challenging. He needed to tread carefully, gathering evidence without tipping off Mrs. Hawthorne or her influential husband. Mason stood up, determination etched on his face. He had a lead now, a thread to pull that could unravel this whole conspiracy. As he prepared to dive deeper into the investigation, he silently vowed to see this through, no matter the cost. Mason sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of documents and notes. The soft glow of his laptop screen illuminated his weary face as he pored over the latest developments in Lily's case. Suddenly, his phone buzzed with a message from a trusted contact at the courthouse. His heart sank as he read the message. Lucas's brother, a well-connected defense attorney, had somehow managed to fabricate records of Lily's school history. These false documents painted a picture of Lily as a troublemaker with a history of disciplinary issues and suspicious behavior. Mason's hands trembled as he set down his phone. He couldn't believe the lengths these people were willing to go to discredit his daughter. The fabricated records were a direct attack on Lily's character, designed to undermine Mason's case and cast doubt on her innocence. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of despair settling on his shoulders. How could he fight against such powerful adversaries? They seemed to have connections everywhere, able to manipulate records and twist the truth to suit their needs. Mason stood up and walked to Lily's room, gently pushing open the door. She was asleep, her face peaceful and unaware of the storm brewing around her. His heart ached as he watched her, wondering how he could protect her from the lies and deceit that threatened to engulf them. Returning to the kitchen, Mason slumped into his chair. For the first time since this ordeal began, he felt truly overwhelmed. The fabricated school records were a devastating blow, one that could potentially sway public opinion and even influence the course of the investigation. He rubbed his temples, trying to push away the creeping doubts. Could he really stand up against these people? They had money, influence, and seemingly no moral boundaries. Mason had always believed in the power of truth and justice, but now he found himself questioning if it would be enough. As he sat there, surrounded by the evidence of his tireless work, Mason felt a flicker of uncertainty. He had promised Lily that he would make things right, that he would clear her name. But now, faced with this new setback, he wasn't sure if he could keep that promise. The thought of failing Lily, of letting these powerful forces win, made Mason's stomach churn. He had always been her protector, her rock, but in this moment, he felt helpless against the tide of lies and corruption that threatened to sweep them away. The next day, as Mason sat at his kitchen table, drowning in doubt and despair, his phone suddenly lit up with an incoming call from an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering, his voice weary and cautious. "Agent Bennett?" A nervous voice whispered on the other end. I work at the jewelry store. I can't take it anymore. I have something you need to see." Mason's heart raced as he listened intently. The caller, a young employee named Nora, explained that she had been burdened with guilt ever since Lily's incident. She couldn't stand by and watch an innocent girl's life be ruined. "I have proof," Nora said, her voice trembling. "Text messages between Mrs. Hawthorne and our manager. They planned the whole thing." Mason's hand shook as he grabbed a pen and paper, scribbling down Nora's instructions on where to meet. As he hung up, a glimmer of hope sparked in his chest. An hour later, Mason sat in his car in a dimly lit parking lot, waiting anxiously. Nora appeared, looking around nervously before slipping into the passenger seat. She pulled out her phone and handed it to Mason. "Here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I took screenshots. They thought they deleted everything, but I managed to recover these." Mason scrolled through the messages, his eyes widening with each revelation. There it was, in black and white. Mrs. Hawthorne and the store manager discussing their plan to use Lily as a scapegoat for the missing necklace. One message from Mrs. Hawthorne read, "Remember, the necklace was reported stolen weeks ago. We just need a believable suspect to close the case." The store manager had replied, "I've got the perfect mark. A young black girl who comes in often. We'll make it look like she took it." Mason's heart pounded as he read message after message, each one confirming his suspicions and revealing the depths of the conspiracy against Lily. The evidence was damning, showing not only racial profiling, but a deliberate attempt to frame an innocent teenager. "This is exactly what we needed," Mason said, his voice filled with renewed determination. "Nora, you've done the right thing. This evidence will help clear Lily's name and expose Mrs. Hawthorne and her accomplices." Nora nodded, relief washing over her face. "I couldn't let them get away with it. It wasn't right what they did to that girl." As Mason thanked Nora and assured her of his protection, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. The tide was turning. With this concrete evidence in hand, he could finally prove Lily's innocence and bring those responsible to justice. Armed with the damning evidence from Nora, Mason wasted no time in presenting his findings to the authorities. He marched into the police station, determination etched on his face, and demanded to speak with the chief. "Chief Reynolds," Mason said, his voice steady as he laid out the evidence on the desk, I have proof that Lily's detainment was part of a larger conspiracy." Chief Reynolds' eyes widened as he scrolled through the text messages. "This is serious, Agent Bennett, very serious indeed." Within hours, a team of detectives was assembled to reopen the case. They pored over the evidence, cross-referencing the text messages with security footage and witness statements. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, revealing a disturbing pattern of racial profiling and fraud. As the investigation unfolded, more victims came forward, young black customers who had been wrongly accused of theft at the jewelry store. They shared their stories, each one adding weight to the case against Mrs. Hawthorne and the store manager. Detective Nina Garcia, the lead investigator, shook her head in disbelief as she reviewed the mounting evidence. "It's clear now," she said to Mason. "This wasn't just about your daughter. It was a systematic targeting of innocent people to cover up their insurance fraud." The authorities dug deeper into the jewelry store's practices, uncovering a trail of falsified reports and suspicious insurance claims. Mrs. Hawthorne's involvement became increasingly apparent, her carefully crafted facade of respectability crumbling under scrutiny. As the investigation progressed, Mason felt a mix of relief and anger. Relief that the truth was finally coming to light, and anger at the injustice that had been allowed to persist for so long. One afternoon, as Mason sat in on a briefing with the investigative team, Chief Reynolds entered the room with a grim expression. "We have enough," he announced. "The district attorney has decided to file charges against Mrs. Hawthorne and the store manager for fraud and conspiracy." A hush fell over the room as the weight of the announcement sank in. Mason closed his eyes, letting out a long breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Justice was finally within reach. As the investigation into the jewelry store conspiracy unfolded, Officer Lucas Harrow found himself caught in the crosshairs of an internal affairs inquiry. The department launched a disciplinary action against him, scrutinizing his role in the wrongful detention of Lily Bennett. Lucas sat nervously in a small bare room at the police station, facing two stern-faced investigators. "Officer Harrow," one of them began, "we need to discuss your actions on the day of the incident involving Lily Bennett." Lucas's palms grew sweaty as he nodded, his throat tight with anxiety. "I understand," he managed to say. The investigators delved into every aspect of that fateful day, questioning Lucas's decision-making process and his relationship with Mrs. Hawthorne. As they pressed harder, Lucas felt his carefully constructed explanations begin to crumble. "We're particularly interested in your connection to Mrs. Hawthorne through your brother," the second investigator said, leaning forward. "Did this relationship influence your actions that day?" Lucas's heart raced as he struggled to find the right words. "I didn't think it did at the time, but now I'm not sure," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. As the investigation progressed, Lucas's earlier apology to Lily and Mason came under intense scrutiny. Colleagues began to question whether it had been a genuine moment of remorse or a calculated attempt to deflect blame. Officer Maria Fernandez, who had witnessed the apology, shared her doubts with the investigators. "It seemed sincere at the time," she said, "but now, knowing what we know about his connection to Mrs. Hawthorne, I can't help but wonder if it was just damage control." Lucas found himself increasingly isolated at the precinct. Whispers followed him down the hallways, and conversations would abruptly stop when he entered a room. The weight of his actions and the possibility of losing his job pressed down on him like a physical burden. One evening, as Lucas sat alone in the locker room, the full impact of his situation hit him. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Years of hard work and dedication to the force now hung in the balance, all because of one terrible mistake. As the investigation into the jewelry store incident continued to unfold, Lucas Harrow found himself at a crossroads. The weight of his actions and the potential consequences bore down on him, leaving him sleepless and anxious. After days of internal struggle, he made a decision that would change everything. With trembling hands, Lucas dialed Mason Bennett's number. His heart pounded in his chest as he waited for an answer. When Mason's deep voice came through the line, Lucas almost lost his nerve. "Agent Bennett," Lucas began, his voice barely above a whisper, "this is Officer Harrow. I need to talk to you in person, if possible." There was a long pause on the other end. Finally, Mason agreed to meet Lucas at a small coffee shop on the outskirts of town. The next day, Lucas arrived early, nervously fidgeting with his cup of coffee. When Mason walked in, Lucas's stomach twisted with guilt and fear. The FBI agent's face was a mask of carefully controlled emotions as he sat down across from Lucas. "Thank you for meeting me," Lucas said, his eyes downcast. "I need to tell you something important." Mason nodded, his gaze steady and expectant. Lucas took a deep breath and began to speak. "I made a terrible mistake that day with Lily. I let my judgment be clouded by my own biases." His voice cracked with emotion. "But there's more to it than that." As Lucas continued, he revealed the pressure he had felt from his brother to act on Mrs. Hawthorne's tip. "My brother, he's always been there for me. When he called and told me about Mrs. Hawthorne's concerns, I felt like I had to do something. But I should have known better. I should have questioned it more." Tears welled up in Lucas's eyes as he spoke. "I'm not trying to make excuses. What I did was wrong, and I take full responsibility for my actions. But I want you to know that I truly am sorry, not just for what happened to Lily, but for being part of a system that allows these injustices to happen." Mason listened intently, his expression softening slightly as Lucas poured out his heart. The officer's confession revealed a depth of internal conflict that Mason hadn't expected. "I understand if you can't forgive me," Lucas said, wiping his eyes, "but I needed you to know the truth. I'm ready to face whatever consequences come my way. I just hope that by coming forward, I can help make things right." Mason sat in silence for a long moment, processing Lucas's words. The anger that had been simmering inside him since the incident with Lily began to soften, replaced by a mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. He looked at Lucas, seeing not just the officer who had wronged his daughter, but a man struggling with his own mistakes and biases. Taking a deep breath, Mason spoke, his voice calm and measured. "Lucas, what you did that day hurt my daughter deeply. It shook her faith in the very people who are supposed to protect her." He paused, watching as Lucas's shoulders slumped even further. "But I can see that you're truly sorry and that you want to make things right." Lucas looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Mason continued, his tone steady but forgiving. "I believe in second chances, Lucas, and I believe that forgiveness is a powerful tool for change." Tears welled up in Lucas's eyes as Mason's words sank in. "You're forgiving me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mason nodded slowly. "Yes, I am, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means giving you the opportunity to do better, to be better." A small smile tugged at the corners of Mason's lips as an idea formed in his mind. "In fact, I think you're in a unique position to make a real difference, Lucas. You've seen firsthand how biases can cloud judgment and lead to injustice. Why not use that experience to help change the culture within the police force?" Lucas's eyes widened as he considered Mason's words. "You really think I could do that?" he asked, a glimmer of hope in his voice. Mason leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I do. It won't be easy, and you'll have a lot to learn. But if you're willing to put in the work, to face your own biases and help others do the same, you could make a real impact." A newfound determination in his posture. "I want to do that," he said firmly. "I want to make amends, not just to you and Lily, but to everyone who's been hurt by prejudice in law enforcement. I know I have a lot to learn, but I'm ready to start." Mason reached out and placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder, a gesture of support and encouragement. "That's the first step, Lucas. Acknowledging that there's room for growth and being willing to do the hard work of changing." In the weeks following the revelations, the consequences of Mrs. Hawthorne's actions and the jewellery store's involvement began to unfold. The once bustling upscale store now stood empty, its windows covered with brown paper and a closed sign hung on the door, a silent testament to the settlement that had forced its closure. Mason walked past the shuttered store, feeling a mix of satisfaction and sadness. While justice had been served, he couldn't help but think of the innocent employees who had lost their jobs due to the actions of a few. He sighed, reminding himself that sometimes change came at a cost. Meanwhile, Mrs. Hawthorne found herself embroiled in a series of legal battles. Her carefully crafted image of a respectable judge's wife had crumbled, revealing a web of deceit and fraud. The courtroom, once a place where she wielded influence through her husband, now became the stage for her own reckoning. As news of the case spread, it sparked a broader conversation about racial bias and insurance fraud. Insurance companies, faced with public scrutiny, began to re-evaluate their policies and procedures. They implemented new guidelines for handling claims, particularly those involving suspected theft and racial profiling. Law enforcement agencies, too, felt the ripple effects of the case. The incident with Lily had exposed deep-rooted issues within the system, prompting a hard look at how officers handled such situations. Mason, seeing an opportunity for meaningful change, threw himself into advocacy work. He spent long hours meeting with police officials, community leaders, and policymakers. His experiences as both an FBI agent and a father who had witnessed injustice firsthand lent weight to his words. Mason spoke passionately about the need for change, sharing Lily's story and the broader implications it held. "We have a responsibility," Mason said during one particularly heated meeting, "to ensure that what happened to my daughter never happens to another child. We need to address the biases that exist within our system and work actively to overcome them." His tireless efforts began to bear fruit. The police department, under increasing pressure from the community and city officials, agreed to implement new policies. These included stricter guidelines for detaining suspects, especially minors, and a more thorough review process for complaints involving racial bias. Perhaps the most significant change came in the form of mandatory bias training for all officers. The program, developed with input from community leaders and experts in racial justice, aimed to help officers recognize and overcome their own biases. It wasn't a perfect solution, Mason knew, but it was a start. As he watched the first group of officers file into the training room, Mason felt a glimmer of hope. Among them was Lucas, looking nervous but determined. Their eyes met, and Lucas gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had both undertaken. Mason smiled, thinking of Lily, and how proud she would be of the changes her experience had sparked. There was still much work to be done, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like they were moving in the right direction. After a few days, Lucas sat at his desk, staring at the resignation letter he had just typed. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly as he contemplated the weight of his decision. With a deep breath, he hit the print button and watched as the printer churned out the document that would change the course of his life. As he walked into the chief's office to hand in his resignation, Lucas felt a mix of emotions: relief, fear, and a glimmer of hope. The chief looked surprised, but not entirely shocked. "Are you sure about this?" the chief asked, his brow furrowed. Lucas nodded firmly. "Yes, sir. I believe it's the right thing to do. I need to make amends, and I can't do that wearing this badge." After clearing out his locker and saying goodbye to his colleagues, Lucas left the precinct for the last time. He felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. In the days that followed, Lucas found himself drawn to a local youth outreach program. He had passed by their colourful storefront many times, but had never given it much thought. Now it seemed like a beacon of hope. With hesitation, he pushed open the door and was greeted by the warm smile of a volunteer coordinator named Sarah. "Hi there, are you interested in volunteering?" she asked cheerfully. Lucas nodded, feeling slightly out of place. "I think I am. I'm looking to make a difference." Sarah's smile widened. "Well, you've come to the right. We always need help with our after-school programs." As Lucas began volunteering, he found himself surrounded by teens from all walks of life. At first, he felt awkward and unsure, his old biases threatening to resurface. But as he listened to their stories and shared in their laughter, something began to shift inside him. There was Daniel, a bright young man with dreams of becoming a lawyer, who spoke passionately about the challenges his family faced, and Tanya, whose talent for art was overshadowed by her struggles at home. Each teen had a unique story, a perspective that Lucas had never considered before. One afternoon, during a group discussion about community relations, a teen named Jason spoke up. "It's hard, you know, feeling like you're always being watched, like you're guilty before you've even done anything." Lucas felt a pang of guilt, remembering his encounter with Lily. He took a deep breath and decided to share his own story. "I used to be a police officer," he began, noticing how some of the teens tensed up. "And I made a terrible mistake. I accused an innocent girl of theft because of my own biases. It cost me my job, but more importantly, it taught me how wrong I was." The room fell silent, all eyes on Lucas. He continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here because I want to learn from you, to understand your experiences. I want to be better." To his surprise, Jason nodded slowly. "That takes guts, man. Owning up to your mistakes like that." As the weeks passed, Lucas found himself looking forward to his time at the youth center. He learned about the daily challenges these teens faced, challenges he had never fully understood before. He listened to their fears, their hopes, and their frustrations with the system. Slowly but surely, Lucas began to see the world through new eyes. The community he once misjudged became a source of inspiration and growth. He realized that his journey toward redemption was just beginning, but for the first time in a long while, he felt he was on the right path. Months later, the sun shone brightly on the community center lawn, where a colorful banner proclaimed, "Building Bridges, Community and Law Enforcement United." People from all walks of life mingled, their excited chatter filling the air with a sense of hope and possibility. Mason Bennett stood near the podium, his FBI badge gleaming in the sunlight. He scanned the crowd, a proud smile spreading across his face as he spotted Lily. His daughter was no longer the timid girl who had been wrongfully accused. Instead, she moved confidently among her peers, engaging in animated discussions about the new initiative. Lily's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm as she explained to a group of younger kids, "This program is going to help us understand each other better. It's about trust and working together." A few feet away, Lucas Harrow stood nervously at the edge of the gathering. He fidgeted with the sleeve of his casual shirt, feeling out of place without his uniform. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, determined to be part of the change he now believed in. As the event officially began, Mason took the stage. His voice rang out clear and strong. "Today marks a new beginning for our community. We are here to build understanding, to foster trust, and to create a safer environment for everyone." He gestured toward Lily and several other young people who had been affected by similar incidents. These brave individuals have turned their experiences into a force for good. They've shown us that healing is possible, that forgiveness can lead to transformation. Lily beamed with pride as she joined her father on the stage. She spoke with a confidence that touched everyone present. "What happened to me was scary and unfair, But it taught me that we all have the power to make a difference. By working together and understanding each other, we can create real change. As Lily finished her speech, she noticed Lucas in the crowd. Their eyes met, and for a moment the memory of that fateful day at the jewelry store flickered between them. But instead of fear or anger, she offered a small, encouraging smile. Lucas felt a lump form in his throat, overwhelmed by the grace Lily had shown him despite his past mistakes. With trembling steps, he approached the stage. As Mason invited community members to share their thoughts, standing before the microphone, Lucas's voice quivered with emotion. "I used to be part of the problem. My biases and mistakes hurt innocent people like Lily, but through her forgiveness and my own journey of learning, I've seen that change is possible. I'm committed to being part of the solution now." The crowd listened in respectful silence, many nodding in understanding. As Lucas stepped down, Mason reached out and shook his hand, a gesture of reconciliation that spoke volumes. Lucas's transformation was only beginning, but he felt a renewed purpose. His time volunteering at the youth centre continued, and his presence became a comforting, familiar face to the teens who had initially viewed him with suspicion. He encouraged others to speak openly, and his own story became a lesson in humility and the power of personal growth. In the months that followed, the ripple effects of the jewelry store case reached far and wide. Mrs. Hawthorne faced multiple criminal charges, while Judge Hawthorne's reputation took a hit as investigations into his connections and decisions in previous cases intensified. Public scrutiny and media coverage called for stronger oversight of judicial actions and a greater focus on ethical accountability within the legal system. Meanwhile, Mason continued his advocacy, collaborating with community leaders, local government officials, and law enforcement agencies. With his background in the FBI and his first-hand experience, Mason became a prominent voice for systemic change. His work was pivotal in implementing reforms, such as bias reduction training, stricter protocols for detaining minors, and enhanced accountability measures in cases of alleged racial profiling. On the streets and in community centers, Mason and Lily's story sparked conversations that hadn't been openly discussed before. Community leaders, teachers, and families joined together to support each other and push for more inclusive policies. It became clear that change wasn't just about one case. It was about addressing long-standing issues that impacted countless lives. Lucas found himself taking part in these discussions, helping police departments across the state implement new training programs that emphasized empathy, understanding, and fair treatment of all individuals. His transformation was an example for other officers to reflect on their own biases and experiences. Lucas's presence became symbolic of the journey from ignorance to awareness, from prejudice to understanding. As these community efforts took hold, Mason noticed a shift. Fewer incidents of unwarranted suspicion and unfair treatment occurred, and complaints involving racial bias were now met with greater scrutiny. The changes were slow and sometimes met with resistance, but progress was being made. A year after the incident, the community centre held another gathering. This time it was a celebration of the strides they'd made together. Mason and Lily stood at the centre of it, their story a reminder of the power of resilience and the possibility of forgiveness. Standing side by side, they watched as the event unfolded, a new generation learning from the mistakes of the past. Lucas, too, was there, volunteering to help with logistics. He had become an integral part of the youth centre, forming strong connections with the teens who once viewed him with suspicion. He was no longer seen as just a former officer. He was a mentor, a guide, and an ally. As the evening wound down, Mason found Lucas standing by the edge of the crowd, looking thoughtful. Mason approached him, giving him a pat on the back. "You did good, Lucas," Mason said with a smile. "You've made a real difference." Lucas nodded, a sense of pride and humility in his expression. I couldn't have done it without you and Lily. You both showed me that change is possible and that there's always room to grow." Mason chuckled softly. "We all have room to grow, and the best part is we're in it together now." Lily joined them, smiling brightly. "You both taught me so much about courage and forgiveness. I hope I can help others see the importance of that." As they stood together, the sun setting in the background, the weight of the past faded, leaving room for hope and a shared commitment to a better future. Mason, Lily, and Lucas knew that the journey was far from over, but they were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. With the community united in purpose and determination, they continued their work, paving the way for a brighter, more just world, one step at a time. Thank you for watching until the end of the story. If you found this video meaningful and thought-provoking, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. Please like and share to help spread this message to even more people, and feel free to leave a comment below to share your thoughts on the character's journey. We'd love to hear from you. The hospital hummed with the usual bustle, nurses wheeling patients, doctors consulting on rounds, the occasional announcement over the intercom. Dr. Malcolm Hayes, a renowned cardiac surgeon, had just wrapped up a grueling 7-hour operation that saved a young woman's life. Wiping sweat from his brow, he headed toward the break room for a much-needed cup of coffee. As he rounded the corner, he spotted a commotion near the hospital's front desk. 2 uniformed officers stood stiffly, one of them a tall, broad-shouldered white man with a badge reading Officer Grayson, speaking curtly to the receptionist. His voice carried across the room. "Are you sure? Because we've got reports of someone matching the description causing trouble in this area." The receptionist, a young woman named Clara, was flustered but firm. "There's no one like that here, officer. This is a hospital, not a nightclub." Officer Grayson's eyes scanned the lobby. They landed on Dr. Hayes, tall, impeccably dressed in scrubs and a white coat, with his stethoscope still draped around his neck. Dr. Hayes hardly fit the image of a troublemaker, yet Grayson's gaze lingered, his expression hardening. He nudged his partner and gestured subtly in Malcolm's direction. The tension was palpable. Malcolm sensed the unspoken challenge, but kept his cool, sipping his coffee as he watched the officer approach. "Excuse me," Grayson said, his tone cold and clipped. "Can I see some ID?" Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "ID? I'm Dr. Hayes. I work here. Is there a problem?" Grayson crossed his arms. "We've got reports of a suspicious individual loitering around here. You match the description. Just show me some ID and we'll clear this up." Curiosity bubbled among the hospital staff, who had begun to gather at the edges of the lobby. Clara, the receptionist, exchanged a worried glance with Malcolm, but he gave her a small nod, signaling her to stay calm. The tension crackled like static electricity. Malcolm reached into his pocket, pulling out his hospital badge and holding it out deliberately. "Here you go. Dr. Malcolm Hayes, Chief of Cardiac Surgery. Is this suspicious enough for you?" Grayson barely glanced at the badge before sneering. "How do I know this isn't fake? Let's step outside and sort this out." Malcolm chuckled softly, his deep, resonant voice carrying through the room. "Step outside, officer. This is my workplace. If there's sorting to be done, we can do it right here. Unless, of course, you're suggesting that I abandon my patients." Grayson's jaw tightened, his hand resting ominously on the holster at his hip. The air grew heavier with the unspoken implication. Malcolm's heart pounded, but his expression remained serene, a quiet strength radiating from him as he waited for Grayson's next move. The lobby seemed to hold its breath, every pair of eyes trained on the unfolding confrontation. Dr. Malcolm Hayes stood tall and unshaken, his presence commanding even as the tension around him swelled. Officer Grayson, however, leaned into his role with unsettling intensity. His partner, a younger officer named Martinez, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. "Step outside, Dr. Hayes. Grayson repeated, his voice louder, more insistent. "I won't ask again." Malcolm tilted his head slightly, studying the officer with an unreadable expression. His calm, poised demeanor only seemed to inflame Grayson further. Finally, Malcolm spoke, his tone measured but resolute. "Officer, let me get this straight. You want me, a surgeon who just finished saving a life, to leave the hospital, my place of work, because I match a description? A description you haven't shared, by the way." Grayson's mouth twitched in irritation. "We have a report of a black male acting suspiciously in the area. You match the height, build, and what, skin color?" Malcolm interrupted smoothly, raising an eyebrow. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a pointed challenge. "Let me guess, the report didn't mention scrubs, a lab coat, or a stethoscope. Did it mention a scalpel in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other?" A few stifled chuckles rippled through the small crowd of hospital staff, breaking the oppressive silence. Grayson's face flushed, and he stepped closer, his posture bristling with barely contained anger. "Don't play games with me," he snarled. "This is official business. If you don't cooperate, I'll have no choice but to take you in." Malcolm's eyes narrowed. He set down his coffee cup on the counter with deliberate care and crossed his arms. "Take me in for what exactly? Drinking coffee? Performing life-saving surgeries? Or existing in this hospital while black?" Martinez shifted uncomfortably again, clearing his throat as if he wanted to intervene, but Grayson cut him off with a sharp glance. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." The audience was growing now. Nurses, interns, and even a couple of patients were watching with a mixture of concern and indignation. Clara, the receptionist, was furiously typing something on her computer, her face set in determination. "You're making it harder, officer," Malcolm said, his voice as steady as ever. "You walked into this hospital looking for trouble. Well, congratulations, you found it. The question is, what are you going to do about it now that you've realized you're wrong?" Grayson opened his mouth to respond, but Malcolm held up a hand to stop him. "Before you answer, let me offer a word of caution. Every moment you stand here harassing me is a moment you're putting the lives of my patients at risk. Think carefully about your next move, officer. Are you prepared to explain this to my staff, to my patients, to your superiors?" The subtle but undeniable power in Malcolm's words hung heavy in the air. Grayson's expression faltered for a split second, but his pride and prejudice refused to let him back down. The silence that followed was electric. Officer Grayson's jaw tightened, his hand flexing over his holstered weapon as if it were a lifeline, but Malcolm didn't flinch. If anything, his unwavering calm only highlighted the officer's increasing aggression. "You're not in charge here, Doctor," Grayson barked, his voice echoing in the cavernous lobby. "This isn't your operating room. Now, are you going to cooperate, or am I going to have to take you in for obstruction?" From behind the desk, Clara stood abruptly, her voice breaking the tension. "Officer, Dr. Hayes is one of the most respected surgeons in this hospital. Everyone here knows him. If you're accusing him of something, you'd better have more than a vague description to go on." Grayson shot her a glare that could have melted glass, but Clara didn't waver. Her bravery seemed to ignite something in the crowd of hospital staff. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group, and a few nurses nodded emphatically. Malcolm seized the moment. "Officer, it seems you're in a room full of witnesses who can vouch for me. Now, unless you're prepared to escalate this into a full-blown public incident, I suggest you reconsider your approach." Grayson's partner, Martinez, finally stepped forward. "Maybe we should take a second to." "Not now," Grayson snapped, cutting him off. He turned his attention back to Malcolm. But the surgeon's confidence and the growing solidarity of the crowd were clearly unnerving him. Suddenly, a low voice came from behind the officers. "What's going on here?" All heads turned as Dr. Elizabeth Crane, the hospital's chief administrator, entered the lobby. Her sharp suit and piercing gaze commanded immediate respect. Her reputation as a no-nonsense leader was well known, and she looked every bit the part now as her eyes darted between Grayson and Malcolm. "Dr. Hayes," she said, her tone calm but firm, "is everything all right?" Malcolm gestured to Grayson. "It seems Officer Grayson here has some concerns about my presence in the hospital." Dr. Crane's expression darkened as she turned to the officers. "Officer Grayson, this is Dr. Malcolm Hayes, our chief cardiac surgeon. He's been with this hospital for over 10 years, and his record speaks for itself. Now, please explain why you feel the need to question one of my staff members in such an aggressive manner." Grayson's confidence faltered, but he quickly rallied. "We received a report of a suspicious individual, and he matched the description." "Of what exactly?" Dr. Crane interrupted, her voice sharp. "A surgeon saving lives, because that's the only description that fits Dr. Hayes." Martinez looked as though he wanted to melt into the floor, but Grayson held his ground. "I was just doing my job, ma'am." Dr. Crane's lips thinned. "And I'm doing mine. This hospital is a place of healing and respect. Your behavior is neither professional nor appropriate, and I will not have my staff subjected to baseless harassment." Grayson bristled, his pride clearly stung. "Ma'am, I don't take orders from you." Malcolm, who had been silent during this exchange, stepped forward. "No, officer, but you do take orders from your department. I imagine they'll be very interested in hearing how you disrupted a hospital for no legitimate reason." At that moment, Clara cleared her throat and held up her phone. "By the way, this entire interaction has been recorded. I've already sent it to our hospital's legal team." Grayson's face drained of colour. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted entirely out of his control. Officer Grayson's face shifted through a spectrum of emotions: anger, disbelief, and something uncomfortably close to fear. His partner, Officer Martinez, seemed torn between loyalty to his superior and the glaring reality of the situation. The crowd in the lobby watched intently, their quiet presence amplifying the weight of the moment. "Let me see that!" Grayson snapped, reaching for Clara's phone. Clara pulled it back sharply, her eyes blazing with defiance. "Not a chance. This recording belongs to me, and I've already sent a copy to our legal department. You can explain your actions to them if you'd like." Dr. Malcolm Hayes watched the exchange with a calm exterior, but inside he was carefully considering his next move. He could see Grayson's ego teetering on the edge of collapse, but the officer wasn't ready to admit defeat. At least not yet. Grayson turned back to Malcolm, his jaw tight. "You think you're clever, don't you? But a phone recording doesn't tell the whole story. I was responding to a legitimate call, and I have the right to investigate any situation I deem suspicious." "Suspicious?" Malcolm's voice was a soft challenge, his words slicing through the tension like a scalpel. "I'd love to hear what exactly you found suspicious about me. Was it the scrubs? The badge? Or was it simply the fact that I don't look like you?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Grayson's hand moved instinctively to his belt, his fingers brushing the radio as if he were considering calling for backup. But before he could act, Dr. Elizabeth Crane stepped forward, her commanding presence filling the room. "Officer Grayson," she said, her voice icy with authority, "let me remind you that you are in a hospital, a place where people come to receive care, not to be harassed. Dr. Hayes is not only an exemplary surgeon, but also a respected leader in this community. If you have any evidence to support your so-called investigation, present it now. Otherwise, I strongly suggest you leave before you dig yourself into an even deeper hole." Grayson's eyes darted to his partner, but Martinez was no longer making any effort to mask his discomfort. "She's right," Martinez said quietly. "We don't have anything to go on. Maybe we should just—" "Quiet," Grayson barked, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. The cracks in his armor were widening, and the pressure of the growing crowd was becoming impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Malcolm stepped to the center of the lobby, his every movement deliberate and controlled. He raised his voice, addressing both the officers and the gathered staff. "This isn't just about me. What's happening here is a reflection of a larger problem, one that too many people in this country face every day. Prejudice like this doesn't just harm individuals, it erodes trust in the very institutions meant to protect and serve." The staff nodded, their quiet support emboldening him. Malcolm turned his attention back to Grayson, his gaze piercing. "You came here expecting to find a criminal, but instead you found a community standing together. So, Officer Grayson, the question is, what kind of man are you going to be when you walk out of this building? Will you admit your mistake, or will you let your pride drag you down further?" Grayson's face burned with humiliation, but he said nothing. For the first time, it seemed as though the weight of his actions was beginning to sink in. Martinez stepped closer to him, his voice low but firm. "Let's go, Grayson. This isn't worth it." Grayson hesitated, his hands still hovering near his radio. The crowd watched, waiting to see if he would relent or escalate. The room seemed frozen in time as Officer Grayson stood at a crossroads. His pride and his authority hung in delicate balance against the sheer weight of reason, evidence, and the resolute crowd that had formed against him. Every eye was on him, every face silently demanding that he make his next move carefully. His partner, Officer Martinez, leaned in closer. "Grayson, let it go. You're making it worse." Grayson's lips tightened into a thin line, his hands still resting near his radio, but he wasn't deaf to the growing murmurs of disapproval from the staff and patients surrounding him. The reality of the moment began to dawn on him. He wasn't in control anymore. Dr. Malcolm Hayes, standing just feet away, refused to look away or back down. His calm demeanor had been Malcolm's shield throughout this ordeal, but now it became his sword. He took a step closer to Grayson, his voice steady but sharp. "Officer, the time for excuses has passed. Everyone in this room has seen your actions for what they are. You came here expecting to intimidate someone who had done nothing wrong, and when confronted with the truth, you refused to listen. Now the entire hospital is watching. What happens next is entirely up to you." Grayson's eyes flicked nervously to Clara, who still held her phone up, the recording feature unmistakable. "You don't have the whole story," he muttered defensively. "I was doing my job." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Your job? Your job is to protect and serve, not to harass and profile. And just so we're clear, you failed on both counts today." At that moment, Dr. Elizabeth Crane stepped forward, her authoritative presence slicing through the tension like a scalpel. "Officer Grayson," she said firmly, "this hospital will not tolerate any behavior that jeopardizes the safety and well-being of our staff or patients. If you don't leave immediately, I will personally ensure that this incident is reported to your superiors, complete with evidence from our security cameras and the statements of every witness here." The mention of security cameras sent a visible ripple of unease through Grayson. He glanced around, suddenly aware of the small black domes mounted on the ceiling, their blinking red lights silently confirming Dr. Crane's words. His bravado cracked further, his posture sagging slightly under the weight of his own folly. Before Grayson could respond, Martinez took a decisive step forward. "She's right," he said, his voice louder and more resolute than before. "We're done here." He turned to Malcolm and nodded. "Dr. Hayes, I'm sorry for the misunderstanding." The sincerity in Martinez's voice surprised Malcolm, but he gave a small nod in return. "Acknowledging the mistake is a good first step," Malcolm replied, his tone measured. "I hope it won't be the last." Grayson opened his mouth to argue, but Martinez shot him a pointed look that silenced him. "Let's go," Martinez said, his voice firm now. Grayson hesitated, his gaze flicking between Malcolm, the crowd, and his partner. Finally, with a barely contained sneer, he turned on his heel and stalked toward the exit. Martinez followed, offering another apologetic glance to the assembled staff before disappearing through the sliding glass doors. As the doors closed behind them, the tension in the room broke like a snapped wire. A collective exhale swept through the crowd, followed by scattered applause. Clara set her phone down, her shoulders relaxing for the first time since the encounter began. As the sliding doors closed behind the officers, Dr. Malcolm Hayes turned back to the gathered crowd. The tension had evaporated, but an unmistakable energy of solidarity and resolve remained. Malcolm, ever the calm presence, raised a hand to quiet the murmurs. "Thank you," he said, his voice clear and resonant, "not just for standing with me, but for standing against something much bigger than this moment." Clara, still visibly shaken, spoke up. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Hayes. I should have called for help sooner." Malcolm gave her a reassuring smile. "You did exactly what you should have, Clara. You stood your ground, and you showed courage. That's what matters." Dr. Elizabeth Crane stepped forward, her sharp gaze sweeping across the staff. "This incident wasn't just about Dr. Hayes. It was about all of us, about how we respond to injustice when it shows up at our doorstep. Today we proved that this hospital is a place where we look out for one another." The staff nodded in agreement, but Malcolm wasn't finished. "What happened here is part of a larger problem," he said, his tone thoughtful but firm. "This wasn't the first time I've been profiled, and it likely won't be the last, but each time we have a choice. Do we let it pass, or do we use it as an opportunity to demand better?" Clara, emboldened by his words, raised her hand slightly. "What can we do? I mean, beyond what we just did?" Malcolm looked at her, his expression one of quiet determination. "We start by documenting everything. This recording, the security footage, witness statements. We send it to the police department and the media if necessary. We hold people accountable, not just to punish, but to educate." Dr. Crane nodded. "I'll be speaking to the hospital's legal team and drafting a formal complaint to the department. But we should also look inward. Let's use this as an opportunity to reinforce our own commitment to equity and inclusion through training, policy reviews, and making sure every staff member feels safe and respected." The staff murmured in agreement, a renewed sense of purpose settling over the group. One of the nurses, a young woman named Rachel, stepped forward hesitantly. "Dr. Hayes, I just want to say, what you did was incredible. The way you stayed calm, even when he was so aggressive. I don't think I could have done that." Malcolm smiled warmly. "It wasn't easy, Rachel, but I've learned that anger, while justified, doesn't always get the results we need. Sometimes the most powerful response is to remain composed and let the truth speak for itself." As the staff began to disperse, Malcolm turned to Dr. Crane. "Thank you for stepping in when you did. That could have gone a very different way." Dr. Crane placed a hand on his shoulder. "You handled yourself brilliantly, Malcolm. I'm proud to have you on this team." Just as Malcolm was about to head back to his office, Clara approached him with her phone. "Dr. Hayes, there's something else I think you should see." She played the video she had recorded. In it, Grayson's every action, his hostility, his baseless accusations, and his reluctance to leave, was laid bare. Clara had also captured Malcolm's poised responses and the moment when Martinez intervened to de-escalate. It was a clear and damning record of the events. "We should share this," Clara said. "The world needs to see what happened here." Malcolm hesitated. He knew the video could spark a broader conversation, but it could also bring backlash and unwanted attention. After a moment of thought, he nodded. "Share it with the hospital's legal team first. If they give the green light, we'll decide how to release it." The video from Clara's phone made its way through the proper channels, first to the hospital's legal team, then to the local police department, and finally to the public. Within days, it was the subject of widespread discussion on social media and local news. The footage was undeniable, capturing every moment of Officer Grayson's hostility and baseless accusations, as well as Dr. Malcolm Hayes's dignified and composed response. The public's reaction was swift and overwhelming. Community leaders called for an investigation into Grayson's conduct, while activists rallied around the hospital, praising its staff for standing up against injustice. Within a week, the police department announced that Grayson had been placed on administrative leave, pending a full inquiry. For Malcolm, the aftermath of the incident brought both challenges and opportunities. His face became synonymous with resilience and grace in the face of prejudice, drawing attention far beyond the hospital's walls. Invitations for interviews poured in from national news outlets, and Malcolm found himself thrust into a role he hadn't sought, that of a spokesperson for change. At first, Malcolm hesitated. He had always been dedicated to his patients, not the spotlight. But the more he thought about the incident, the more he realized the power of his platform. If sharing his story could help prevent others from facing similar treatment, then perhaps it was worth stepping out of his comfort zone. In a live interview with a prominent news network, Malcolm spoke candidly about the experience. "What happened to me wasn't an isolated incident," he said. "It's part of a systemic issue that requires all of us to confront our biases and hold ourselves accountable. This isn't just about one officer or one hospital. It's about creating a society where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, no matter their race or profession." Meanwhile, within the hospital, the incident spurred meaningful change. Under Dr. Elizabeth Crane's leadership, the hospital implemented new training programs focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Staff members were encouraged to share their experiences and ideas for fostering a more inclusive environment, and the hospital's commitment to these values became a model for others in the community. As for Officer Grayson, the investigation into his conduct concluded with consequences that were both swift and impactful. He was suspended without pay and ordered to complete an extensive program on bias and de-escalation techniques. While some in the community demanded harsher penalties, Malcolm advocated for education and reform over retribution. "I don't believe in tearing people down," Malcolm said in a follow-up interview. "I believe in building a better future, one where people like Officer Grayson can learn from their mistakes and become part of the solution." In the months that followed, the hospital became a beacon of hope and progress. Patients, staff, and community members alike drew inspiration from the incident and its aftermath, seeing it as a reminder that change was possible when people stood together. For Malcolm, life gradually returned to its normal rhythm of surgeries, consultations, and late-night coffee runs. But he carried the experience with him, using it as a reminder of his own strength and the strength of those who had stood by him. One day, as he passed through the lobby where the confrontation had unfolded, he paused for a moment. The space was bustling as always, filled with the sounds of healing and hope. Malcolm smiled, knowing that in some small way the hospital and the world were better for what had happened.